Earlier this year, Aeroplan announced that it was making some changes to the flight reward chart. The Aeroplan flight reward chart is what Aeroplan uses to price out its redemptions. The changes that have recently taken effect are the biggest ones that have happened to the program since its relaunch in fall of 2020. Welcome to Prince of Travel, we're the leading platform empowering every global citizen to go further better, and in today's video, we're going to examine all of the changes that have just happened to the Aeroplan flight reward chart and analyze what it means for you. Before we dive into the changes, it's really important to understand the Aeroplan flight reward chart and how it works. Broadly speaking, the flight reward chart is a document that outlines how much you can expect to pay for any given Aeroplan redemption. Aeroplan breaks the world down into 4 zones: North America, South America, the Atlantic zone, and the Pacific zone. In the flight reward chart, there are a number of tables that tell you how much you can expect to pay in Aeroplan points. This includes redemptions with Air Canada and its many partner airlines. Since the fall of 2020, Air Canada flights booked with Aeroplan points have been subject to what's known as dynamic pricing. This means that the cost of an Air Canada flight booked with Aeroplan points will fluctuate depending on how much it costs in cash. Up until now, nearly all of the other Aeroplan partner airlines have been subject to fixed pricing, and this means that as long as there's an award seat available to be booked with points, you'll pay the same price for it every single time. And if you're a savvy Aeroplan user, you knew that if the cost of an Air Canada flight with dynamic pricing was too much, you could look to partner airlines instead, and you typically get it for much less. Now, Aeroplan has some of the most competitive award pricing across all loyalty programs and also access to some of the best airlines. And when Aeroplan announced that it was making changes to its flight reward chart earlier this year, a lot of people wondered exactly how far they'd go. And now that the changes are live, we can dive into those details and let you know exactly what's changed and what hasn't. The first change that you need to know about is that there are now more airlines that are subject to dynamic pricing. This means that in addition to Air Canada flights booked with Aeroplan points, you'll now find dynamic pricing on United Airlines, Etihad Airways, Flydubai, Emirates, and Canadian regional airline partners including Calm Air, Canadian North, and PAL Airlines. And so while most of those partner airlines were subject to fixed pricing in the past, now you can expect to see a range of prices for those airlines, whereas before the pricing was predictable. And now Aeroplan has updated the flight reward chart to reflect all these changes. Let's take a look. So looking at the within North America zone chart, you'll now see Air Canada and/or select partners on one tier and all other partner airlines on another tier. And for flights within or between specific zones, you'll now have to reference the Select Partners tier if you want to get an idea of what you can expect to pay with United Airlines, Etihad Airways, Flydubai, Emirates, and Canadian regional partners. Within each class of service column, you'll notice that Aeroplan now uses a starting at figure rather than a range as it did before. Plus, next to that, you now see a median value, and that wasn't there before either. And so the starting at price is the lowest price that you can expect to pay for Air Canada and the select partners, given the distance and the class of service that you're flying. So for example, in North America, if you're flying with Air Canada or United Airlines on a flight that's between 0 and 500 miles, the lowest price that you can expect to pay is 6,000 points, and the median value that Aeroplan's reporting is 10,200 points. Now in some cases you might pay more or you might pay less, and that's just how dynamic pricing works. And in my opinion, the biggest changes that have happened are that United Airlines flights are no longer subject to fixed pricing, and rather they're subject to dynamic pricing. And here's why. United Airlines and Air Canada fly to many of the same destinations around the world. And previously, if I was looking to fly to Europe or Asia or maybe Australia, I'd first look to see the cost in Aeroplan points for an Air Canada flight since it's the most convenient for me. But if I saw that the price was too high through dynamic pricing, I'd start looking at partner airlines instead, and given that we live in North America, United Airlines happened to be a pretty convenient option. And of course, this meant taking a positioning flight to one of United's US hubs to access the airline. United happens to have some excellent lounges in its network, so I didn't mind the extra effort. And previously, United Airlines flights booked with Aeroplan points were subject to fixed pricing, which meant that as long as an award seat was available, I knew that I'd always pay the same amount for it. And now, since United Airlines flights booked with Aeroplan points are subject to dynamic pricing, it's a lot more difficult to predict exactly how many points it's going to cost me for the same flight that I used to be able to book at a fixed price. Now, another reason why I think this is such a big deal is that United Airlines is one of the most reliable Aeroplan partners to release last-minute award availability on nearly all of its long-haul routes. And so, I knew with almost 100% certainty that I'd be able to book a United Airlines flight at the last minute to almost anywhere in the world at a fixed price, even in business class. And now that these changes have taken effect and United Airlines flights now use dynamic pricing when booked with Aeroplan points, it looks like the cost for these same flights has gone up nearly across the board. Here's a couple of examples. So prior to the changes, you could fly fly one way between Chicago and Toronto for 6,000 Aeroplan points in economy or 15,000 points in business class. And with these changes, you'll now have to pay 10,000 Aeroplan points for economy or 30,000 Aeroplan points for business class. Another great United sweet spot with Aeroplan was flying between San Francisco and Tahiti. Now previously that would cost you 35,000 Aeroplan points in economy or 55,000 points in business class, and those same flights now cost 45,000 points in economy or 85,000 points in business class. Or let's say you wanted to fly from Chicago to London. Now previously that flight would cost you 35,000 Aeroplan points in economy or 60,000 Aeroplan points in business class, but now the same flight costs you 40,000 Aeroplan points in economy or 80,000 points in business class. Of course, this is bad news for anybody who uses Aeroplan points to book flights with United, since now it looks like you have to pay more for the same flights than you used to. But of course, these changes are very new and we don't know if things are going to change in the future. For example, Aeroplan mentioned that members would have access to a greater amount of award inventory, likely comes paired with having to pay more for it, but this would at least mean that members would have access to more flights to begin with. And in the coming weeks and months, we're going to be keeping an eye on this, so we'll be sure to let you know if anything else changes. The second major change that's taken effect that I want to talk about today is that Etihad Airways business class flights are now back with Aeroplan. Nearly 5 years ago, Aeroplan announced a new partnership with Etihad Airways. And for a few years, it was really easy to book flights with Etihad Airways, including in economy, in business class, and even first class using Aeroplan points. Now, under the old Aeroplan flight reward chart, flights with Etihad Airways were subject to fixed pricing, and a one-way flight between Toronto and Abu Dhabi would cost 55,000 points in economy or 90,000 points in business class. And for a few years, this was one of the best ways to get between North America and the Middle East, or the Indian subcontinent, or even all the way to Southeast Asia. Now, for some reason, for the last couple of years, it hasn't been possible to book Etihad Airways business class or first class using Aeroplan points like you used to be able to. However, with the recent changes, Etihad Airways flights are now bookable with Aeroplan points again, but there's a catch. Etihad Airways is one of the select partners that's now subject to dynamic pricing with Aeroplan. And so in the past, it was subject to fixed pricing, but now it's subject to dynamic pricing, and unfortunately, it looks like you're going to have to pay a lot more than you used to. Now, based on our first searches, a one-way flight between Toronto and Abu Dhabi now costs nearly 80,000 Aeroplan points, and a one-way flight between Toronto and Abu Dhabi in business class now costs over 220,000 Aeroplan points. And so, depending on how you look at this, on one hand, it's great that Etihad Airways business class flights are now bookable with Aeroplan points again, but on the other hand, the cost is a lot higher than it used to be, and it's also quite a bit more expensive than what you might pay when you book the same flights with other loyalty programs. The third big change that I want to talk about today is that Aeroplan redemptions with Canadian regional airline partners are now subject to dynamic pricing too. So Aeroplan has partnerships with Calm Air, Canadian North, and PAL Airlines. And these airlines operate flights to northern Canada and remote destinations across the country. Under the old flight reward chart, these airlines were subject to fixed pricing, which again meant that as long as there was award availability, you could predict with 100% certainty how much you'd pay for the same flight. Now, if you've ever flown with Calm Air or Canadian North or PAL Airlines, you might notice that the cash prices for these flights is particularly high. And for years, booking flights with these airlines using Aeroplan points at a fixed rate was actually one of the most valuable ways to redeem Aeroplan points. Depending on the cash price and the route, it wasn't unusual to get more than 10 cents per point worth of value, which is outstanding. However, now these airlines are subject to dynamic pricing, which means that the price that you pay for these flights might now fluctuate depending on the underlying cash price. For example, a one-way flight between Ottawa and Iqaluit used to cost a fixed price of 10,000 Aeroplan points. And now that the changes have taken effect to the Aeroplan flight reward chart, it looks like that same flight now costs 18,100 Aeroplan points. Now at first glance, that looks like it's a pretty steep hike, and you might wonder if it's actually worth redeeming Aeroplan points for flights with Canadian North anymore. And the answer is that you're still going to get really good value for redeeming Aeroplan points with Canadian regional airline partners, it's just not as valuable as it used to be. For example, if a one-way flight between Ottawa and Iqaluit costs 18,100 Aeroplan points and about $90 in taxes and fees, that same flight might price out at around $1,054. Now, after you take into consideration the taxes and fees on the Aeroplan redemption, it works out to a value of about 5.4 cents per point, which is still excellent. Now at Prince of Travel, we value Aeroplan points at 2.1 cents per point, and this example shows that that's more than twice our target value for Aeroplan points. And so, if you've had your eyes on a flight to Iqaluit or Yellowknife or Churchill or anywhere else that these Canadian regional airlines fly, the good thing is that you're still going to get excellent value for using Aeroplan points instead of cash, but the bad news is that it's just not going to be as good as it used to be. So these changes to the Aeroplan flight reward chart are now in effect, and we're going to be spending a lot of time examining them and doing some deep dives on the Prince of Travel website. And this time around, unfortunately, it looks like the changes are largely negative. And if you find yourself as one of the people that are affected by the changes, your best bet is to look for award availability with one of Aeroplan's many other partner airlines that still uses fixed pricing. But if you're unable to do that, you can use the new starting app figures for Air Canada and select partners as a guideline to see if you're getting the best value for your Aeroplan points or not. Now, in my opinion, Aeroplan is still an excellent loyalty program, one of the best programs in the world, and there's plenty of opportunities to get outsized value through the program. And if you'd like me to do a deep dive into all of the different partner airlines that are available through the Aeroplan program, leave a comment on this video and I'll see you there.